Hi, everyone, and welcome to Mental Health Mondays for the Cathedral of the Rockies. And Davin, Katie, Allie, and I are so excited to be here today, chatting with you about profound living, profound learning. And we're going to be talking about the research we have regarding how that actually plays out in people's lives, what we're learning from it, and then also how it can be applied in your life as we go through these very difficult, challenging times. So let me just tee it up for you all. Today, what we're going to talk about is what our research tells us about getting through the pandemic and other difficult times in general, and how one makes meanings in challenging life situations. And the reason that that's important for us is because we've been doing research into this area, and it comes at such an opportune time because we're all going through these things during this pandemic. But guess what? We go through these things as part of our lives, through our entire lives. So even though the pandemic hopefully is drawing to somewhat of a close, drawing to some level of lessness than it was before, we know that we're all going to be going through difficult times. And so then how can we actually, in a very rich, meaningful mental health way, move through those in productive, generative ways? So we'll introduce ourselves just so everybody kind of knows who's on the team. It's Davin, me, Allie, and Katie, and I'm going to stop sharing so that you all can see our faces. Michael Kroth is my name. I'm a professor at the University of Idaho in a program called Adult Organizational Learning and Leadership. I'm also a member of the Cathedral of the Rockies, and I've actually done a couple of these Mental Health Mondays before, and so I found it very rewarding to do them, and so I'm glad to be back here today. So let me just turn it to Davin.
I'm Davin Carr-Chillman, and I was in the faculty at the University of Idaho for several years and had the great pleasure and honor to work with all three of the folks who are here. And Michael and I started our adventure with some of this research we'll talk to you about today. I'm now on the faculty at the University of Dayton in educational leadership.
So when Davin left the University of Idaho, the collective IQ of the institution went down 10 points. He's a huge loss, but we're so lucky because he's still working with us in our research apprenticeship and with everyone else. So Katie, why don't I go to you? I'm not sure our order here. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Wilson. I'm a PhD student in the AOLL program. I'm currently an adjunct instructor of psychology at North Idaho College here in Coeur d'Alene. And previous to that, I was a clinical therapist specializing in trauma for 15 years before I decided to move to adult education. So I'm particularly happy to be invited to Mental Health Mondays.
Yeah, it's a very, very appropriate degree, and her experience really fits in with what we're going to be talking about today. So finally, Allie.
Hi, thanks for letting me be here with you all. My name is Allie Threet. I am also a second year PhD student in the AOLL program, Adult Organizational Learning and Leadership at the University of Idaho. Currently, I'm the Executive Director of Career Services at Dixie State University in Southern Utah. It's in St. George, Utah. I do have a little bit of experience with some of these type of issues as I worked in group homes and residential treatment facilities for several years. So thanks for letting me be here.
Thanks, everyone. I think as everyone will see, the topics that we're going to be engaged in here come from our experiences, our research interests, and then also our interest in actually trying to be helpful to other folks. So we're going to be talking a little bit about how to get through this pandemic based on our research, but I thought we'd just share briefly kind of the genesis of this. And I'll start, and then Davin, I'll let him turn it over to him pretty quickly. But a few years ago, as Davin mentioned, we started thinking about this topic of profound learning, what it means to be a profound learner. And defining initially a profound learner as someone who continues to go deeper and deeper in her or his life over time. And so those areas of profound learning can be multiple. They can be deep learning in relationships, deep learning in spirituality, deep learning in cognitive, mental thinking, and those types of things. So all the areas of our life in a world that many would say has become very superficial, shallow, and is moving in those directions. So profound learning is going deeper and deeper and finding ways to help learners actually do that over their lifetime. So one of the places where this research has played out for Davin and me, we actually started our very first article was on spiritual disciplines and how those actually play out over as practices in our lives. But how that's played out for us here is that we have a research apprenticeship. And a research apprenticeship is all our doctoral students, folks like Allie and Katie, working with professors like Davin and me and others in an apprenticeship model, starting research from the very beginning when folks are accepted until at the very end, they're doing their own dissertation work and working as scholars. And so that's kind of what set this up. Many of our students in our research apprenticeship are taking on a variety of topics related to profound learning, profound living, profound leadership, and more. So I'm going to turn it over to Davin right now and let him kind of move us forward from there.
Thanks, Michael. So one of the an overwhelming colloquial sense of profound or deep is the positive sense of it. You know, we think of viewing the Grand Canyon as this profound experience, so profoundly beautiful. A piece of music has a profound experience on you. But something that we know anecdotally from our own experience that also emerged very quickly in our research was that it's much more nuanced than that, that profound experiences are really pretty agnostic in terms of being good or bad. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. And you know, the real stickiness of profundity, profound experiences, is that they're inescapable. They're a part of your life, whether you want them, invite them, or not. They're indelible. Once you've experienced something profound, you're very unlikely to be the same afterwards again. You can't go home again, kind of thing. And it tends to make an impact that lasts. And they're disruptive. They tend to change life again, sometimes in good ways and sometimes in bad ways. So our research trajectory very quickly started to accommodate that as we wanted to look at, well, how do you manage the uncertainty of that? If we're trying to think about profound learning and ways to make life better for people, because why do research if you aren't making life better for people in some way, shape, or form? So we started exploring approaches to living and learning that accommodate this fact of life with a minimum of self-deception or a minimum of self-betrayal. And a rock of that perspective is practices. And Michael mentioned that a little bit earlier, that one of our first articles, but also still something that is a centerpiece of our research, is the idea of practices, things that as humans we can do day in and day out to manage and maybe transform the uncertainty of life into something better. So even though Michael and I have done some research, the really powerful stuff that comes out of our research apprenticeship and out of the work that's happening at the University of Idaho and other places happens with our doctoral students. So I'll turn it over to Katie, who will tell you about her wonderful research.
Thank you, Dr. Karchelman. So Dr. Kroth invited me to be open and authentic about my research, as well as my personal experience and what it is that caused me to be interested in human flourishing. And my particular area of research is human flourishing following extraordinarily challenging life experiences. So as I said earlier, I was a clinical psychotherapist that specialized in psychological trauma for about 15 years before I moved over into the world of being a college educator. So I'm teaching psychology right now, But I'm also an advocate for cancer patients, and I advocate for a particular group of cancer patients with ocular melanoma, which is a particularly aggressive form of cancer that I happened to be diagnosed with about 4.5 years ago. So this really sparked my interest in helping people who have undergone really difficult situations become the best of themselves. And the way that I describe flourishing is just becoming the best you that you can be. And as I'm researching, I'm seeing there's so many different definitions of human flourishing. But I think the most simple definition is just being the best you that you can be. And I have found from my own personal experience, as well as my experience as a clinician specializing in trauma, and in my experience in research, that sometimes challenging life situations really act as an impetus for us to become the best that we can be. So one of the things that I found in my own personal experience after I was diagnosed and became an advocate for cancer patients myself, one of the things that I noticed was I was making really big changes. And I was finding, after I went through this grieving process that was similar to a lot of what my clients had gone through who'd experienced traumatic experiences, was finding that I was undergoing some pretty important changes myself. And so this prompted my research into looking at why do we have a tendency, a lot of us, to flourish after we've gone through challenging life experiences. So to be really specific, not only was I diagnosed with an aggressive cancer, but I also, because of the radiation treatment, am rapidly losing my eyesight. So this really, again, prompted me to look at this concept of human flourishing and post-traumatic growth and how challenging life circumstances can bring us to want to be better versions of ourselves. So if you could pull up those slides. Some of the things that I found, again, in myself and in my clients and in my research is that if you allow yourself to learn, if one were to allow themselves to learn from challenging life circumstances, they find that they have more of an increased appreciation for life. And I certainly found that in my own life. And also more meaningful interpersonal relationships. So I saw that with my clients who'd experienced trauma, but I also really saw that in myself. I was less prone to put up with toxic individuals and really embrace those relationships with the people who stuck with me through this really difficult experience. And also, I heard this from a lot of my clients, I've read this in the research, but also found that I was truly amazed at my level of resilience. I did not even apply for this PhD program until after I had been diagnosed and treated, and I knew that it was going to be really, really difficult, but I felt this push that I needed to accomplish, and that I really wanted to contribute something to individuals who were experiencing the same difficulties that I am. So another thing that I've looked at and that I've seen quite a bit, again, in previous clients, was changed priorities. I think that we really have this new, we know what's important in life and what doesn't matter. So your priorities change, and it really brings about the simplicity in your life that feels good and feels right. And because of that, I think that we also, people who experience these great challenges really tap into their spirituality and recognize that there is a deeper purpose and a deeper meaning in life. So a richer existential and spiritual life. So I think I remember in grad school when I was a clinical therapist, training to be a clinical therapist, this amazing theorist, Viktor Frankl, was introduced to us. And we were taught about this concept of logotherapy and existentialism. And at the time, it sounded really scary and intimidating to me. And I even remember my psychology professor saying, no one will ever understand existentialism. It's really difficult. But after I started my research at U of I and really got into Viktor Frankl and his philosophy and his teachings, the whole concept of existentialism is really simple. It's just about finding meaning from suffering. And I think with my background as a clinical therapist, we are trained to look at trauma and suffering in terms of there's a lot of symptomology that comes along with it. And it's something that needs to be cured and treated, and it's bad. And when I looked at alternative theories of trauma, I began to see that there were so many different aspects of trauma. And one of the things that I came across was this model of post-traumatic growth. And I'd never heard of that when I was training as a therapist. I'd never heard of post-traumatic growth when I was treating clients. And I kind of stumbled upon it when I was reading about Viktor Frankl. But post-traumatic growth is all about individuals, when they go through a challenging life circumstance, they have the capacity to learn from it and thrive and become amazing versions of themselves. So I was really intrigued with this idea of post-traumatic growth. And the more research that I've done, the more I realized that we kind of, from a Western medicine perspective or medical perspective, take on this view that trauma is horrible and it's bad and it's difficult, and it is. And going through a grieving process is very difficult, but I think we ignore the big picture, which is trauma can lead us to amazing outcomes and to help us help other people. So I really got into this model of post-traumatic growth and have been doing a lot of research on how individuals who go through challenging life circumstances, and we all go through challenging life circumstances. We can't avoid that as human beings. It's something that we're not going to exit this earth being able to avoid. And I think that's particularly relevant now, having gone through this global pandemic. And we're probably not going to go through, like Viktor Frankl, through losing almost his entire family in the Holocaust. And hopefully we won't face challenges like that. But I think that his message about thriving, the ability to thrive and our ability as humans to demonstrate resilience is pretty impactful and was pretty impactful for me. So the research that I'm doing, again, is about flourishing after extraordinary, challenging events. And the group that I'm very interested in learning more about are my fellow ocular melanoma survivors. So again, this is a really aggressive sort. There's two forms. There's a very aggressive form, and the kind that I would really like to do some research on. The people that I want to research are the ones who are fighting this aggressive cancer on a daily basis and battling vision loss. And I really would like to learn from, I think this is a group of experts going through challenges and thriving, would really like to learn more about meaning making from the diagnosis and practices that they've adopted. So with that, that was a lot. With that being said, I will turn things over to Allie to talk about gratitude.
Thank you, Katie. Like she said, my topic is based on gratitude and generosity. That's where it started. As we talk about human flourishing and profound living and profound learning, one of the things that we came upon is that there's certain attributes of wanting to give back and finding that meaning and going deeper. And that led me to being very curious about the topic of generosity. Generosity in itself is giving good things to others freely and abundantly. There is a key criteria though, and that has to be that whatever I am giving has to be of value to me as the giver. Generally, if you're being generous, it comes in the form of one of four different things: either financial giving, volunteering, relational generosity, or neighborly generosity. As far as being grateful for things, those are being able to recognize and acknowledge the good things that you have in your life and being able to acknowledge that. That's a key piece of it. So as I was thinking through all of these these two different concepts while we were moving through profound living topics, I started recognizing that there are some people out there that have the ability to be grateful for things, and they know that they have good things in their life and they acknowledge them. They might even be doing practices that increase their gratitude. However, not always did that manifest itself into generous acts. But the more research that I was reading, sometimes generous acts are called pro-social acts. And the more research that I was researching said that they in turn reinforce each other. So then I started to wonder, is it just me that can see a difference, or is that something that is real, that is out there? So one of the things that I did was I looked at two different surveys. The first one was a national survey conducted for the John Templeton Foundation in 2012. And that's a baseline index for measuring gratitude. It involved more than 2,000 online interviews and represented a really demographic cross-section of the US. And what it found out was that on a weekly basis, 77% of people felt like they had a grateful disposition, that they were able to acknowledge and recognize things that they were grateful for in their lives. However, the Charities Aid Foundation, which is the World Giving Index, reported that although the United States consistently is rated as the most generous per capita country over the course of the last decade, only about 58% of Americans typically reported doing something generous when polled annually over the last 10 years. And that number is declining in the United States. And so in my mind, I said, well, if this is supposed to be reciprocal and feeling grateful for things is supposed to help with our generosity and our generous acts, why is there that discrepancy between the 77% to the 58%? One of the concepts that was introduced to me throughout this process has been an abundance mindset, or an abundance mentality, it's more commonly called. And that is a term that was coined by Stephen Covey in the late 80s. It has been, there's been books written about it. There's not been a vast amount of research done on it. But that abundance mentality, basically what that says is there's enough for everybody, that there's enough love to give, there's enough money to give, there's enough time to give. That last quote I really like. It says, when we give generously with an abundance mentality, what we give away will multiply. And so I started wondering, I wonder if those people who have the attitude of gratitude, if through reflection and practices, they in turn develop that abundance mentality, which leads to generous acts and then reinforces the overall gratitude. And so I started researching with that. One of the ways that I wanted to look at it was I wanted to see if gratitude and generosity could be used as coping strategies, if they could be used for people that are dealing with trauma. And the reason why I was wondering that is because there's a lot of really great benefits that have been shown, that have been researched and studied and proven that you can have these types of benefits if you have gratitude and generosity. And some of those are being healthier physically. It has increased happiness and life satisfaction, a decreased materialism, less likely to suffer from burnout. You have more meaning in your life. You feel like you're more kind and helpful towards others. And this has been proven with youth and with adults. So my thought was, if generosity and gratitude could be used for coping strategies, that the people that were practicing these coping strategies could then in turn benefit from these wonderful benefits that have been proven. I just recently started doing some interviews. My first one, because I have 3 lined up, I've only done 1 so far. The first one was with a lady that has lost 3 children to suicide. She has 5 children originally and has lost 3 of them. And I know that in just looking at my own life, I think that I would struggle moving forward with that. And she has been able to, not easily, she's still working through it, but she is wanting to give back. And in my mind, I said, what is it that creates that desire to give back, to give strength to others, to show generosity to others? And so she was the first one that I interviewed. She's really struggling with this, with the 3 of them, obviously. But one of the things that she mentioned is what she noticed was she started noticing the generous and acts of kindnesses toward her and the acts of love toward her. As she was just down in the depths of despair and trying to make meaning of all of this and trying to wrap her head around it, that is the thing that she noticed first, was the generosity of others. That led to an attitude of gratitude. It led to her realizing, wow, people care about me and they love me and they're willing to help me out and do anything that they can do to help me. And she started reflecting on the people in her life that was making a difference, that were making a difference. And then she started thinking about, what are ways that I can give back? What are things that I can do on a daily basis to really recognize the good in my life and recognize that life is still worth living and moving forward. She started doing some of the practices that have been proven to be helpful to increase overall gratitude. And some of those practices have been utilizing a gratitude journal. There's a thing called mental subtraction, where an individual imagines what life might be like if a positive event had not occurred, or writing down 3 good things. her choice was the journal, the gratitude journal, and just recognizing those things that were happening in her life. Through the journaling and through the generous acts of others, she has now started to develop that abundance mindset, that abundance mentality, and realized, I do have enough. Even through all of this trauma and tragedy, I have enough. I can give back. I can be that strong support for someone else. She was telling me a story. She said that she went to a workshop, a retreat for moms that had lost children to suicide. And they had to light a candle for the child that they lost. Sorry, this is pretty fresh and it's so hard. Like, anyway, this lady next to her was lighting a candle, and she had to go and she had to light first candle, then the second candle, and then the third candle. And the lady standing next to her said, oh my goodness, if you can do this, if you can get through this, then so can I. And that was one of the turning points where she said, I do have this abundance mentality. I do have this abundance that I can give, that I can make meaning of this. And so that's been something that had those same components, but it was worked a little bit differently based on the level of the trauma that she endured. So that's been something interesting that I have I found out in the last week. I will have those 2 other interviews later this week, and it's interesting to see if some of those same themes are going to come through. But that's just a little bit about what I have been doing and some of my research interests, and a little bit how it ties into trying to get through traumatic experiences, trying to get through hard times. And so now I'll turn it back over to Michael.
Thank you, Allie and Katie. So the researchers we're talking about are not those scholars where the research ends up in some journal someplace that no one ever reads. But you can just see how practical this is, and trying to figure out what really makes a difference from going from those profound moments that Davin was talking about, which are profoundly bad, which we would never ask for, and coming out of that in ways which are generative and generous and positive and mentally healthy. And so how can that happen? And so both Katie and Allie are looking at that, and you can already start to see how some of those qualities and some of those processes are helpful. So now we're gonna spend the rest of our time, and we don't have much, but we're gonna spend the rest of our time actually just talking amongst ourselves and asking each other questions, and really talking about profound living and learning in difficult times. And we'll just spend a little bit of time. Davin, you always have good questions, or what's on your mind? What are you thinking about?
Thanks, Michael. So, and we didn't rehearse this at all, so this is shooting from the hip. So, Katie, thinking about your amazing experiences and your powerful research, you talked about how we treat trauma and suffering as things to treat, right? So there's symptomology involved. So it's something we want to avoid and get away from. So there's a two-edged sword, or there's a bit of a conundrum there, right? So should we invite suffering? Should we invite trauma? No?
No, I think absolutely we need to invite suffering. And it's interesting that you talk about avoiding suffering. And in the world of psychology, we talk about PTSD as a disorder of avoidance, because we tend to avoid people, places, and things that remind us of the trauma. And although there's a lot to be said for the grieving process, I think we need to go through that important grieving process before we can actually invite growth and flourishing. But I think that it is equally important to sit in the suffering and to allow yourself to learn and invite the very important lesson that comes from the suffering that you're experiencing. And I think in order to do that, we as human beings have a tendency to avoid suffering. And I think we're taught that, and that's emphasized in my clinical world. It was, how do we help people get past suffering and avoid it? And when I happened upon my own experience, recognized that getting past the suffering without learning the lessons that come from it, and really listening to what's going on, listening to your body, listening to the people around you, you really kind of languish in misery. You know, just like the quote from Viktor Frankl, there, you have to find meaning in suffering. And if you can find meaning in suffering, man, that opens up so many doors to just becoming an amazing person and having so many insights that hopefully, you know, you can pass along to people who are struggling.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I think about so many ways to pursue that research further, Katie. There's just, it's so generative. The opportunities there are tremendous, both empirically as well as philosophically, so, thinking through larger implications of it, right? So Viktor Frankl was in the Holocaust, and we would have prevented the Holocaust, obviously, from happening, if we could have. But these really important finer points, to make as we pursue these important ideas. Yeah, so wonderful, great stuff.
And who better can we learn from, I think, than people who have overcome? In my experience and my own research, I think we have the most to learn from people like, who Ali interviewed, who I want to talk to, people who've overcome amazing challenges and have learned.
And from a scholarly perspective, learning from that and adding to our body of knowledge, so that not just us personally, not us as individuals personally can learn from that, but how can we share that so those can become deeper and deeper research with more and more applications, so we can help learners that are going to go through all that throughout a lifetime to move into that human flourishing. Human flourishing has been around, the whole idea has been around for centuries. Devin has a degree in philosophy, so he could talk about this for a long time, much more depth than I could. But as we head in those directions and think about profound learning, one thing we've talked about over time is that we live in a world which tends to move us towards short attention spans, to the shallows, etc. And yet it's deep love and deep suffering that are real portals into the profound. And whether it's the suffering of Viktor Frankl or the love of the vastness of nature, or whatever those things, those are ways in which we can touch into those areas. But how do we move in those directions? And so I'm curious, Davin, if you wouldn't mind mentioning a little bit about intentionality, because part of this has to do with how do we develop that intentionality so we don't sit and suffer and become bitter, which is, we all go through some of that, right? So Davin's thought quite a lot about this, I think, and has some real insights about intentionality. And
yeah, intentionality in particular, moving it away from the idea that, so this is something, that's about your willpower, about your volition, but really more about intentionality as attention, things that we encounter in life. And really this connects to practices and Katie's research and Ali's research in terms of the embeddedness of values in our basic structures, that we don't take a step without it being informed by our value systems. So so we'll take it from there in the sense that values are shot through with the facts of our lives. So, people think about facts and values as being separate, but they're not, they're deeply intertwined. So intentionality sort of calls that to mind. So, Ali, when I think about your research, one of my pet peeves is a zero-sum attitude. So the zero-sum game, transactional approach to life. If I win, that means I'm the winner, everyone else is a loser, right? In any given situation, there's a winner, there's a loser. There isn't a way to have a win-win. Or in negotiations, there is no getting to yes, right? There's got to be a winner, right? And there's got to be a loser. So I'm interested, so as you look at and think about the implications of your research, where do you see it having the most impact, you know, maybe organizationally or socially, or just as you think about people who can use your research and learn from it?
My first thought would be education, just because I sat through many meetings today talking about how we have a lack of resources. And so that would be my first kind of superficial response. But as far as an abundance mentality, I've been talking about this concept to several people in all various walks of life in the last couple of months. And the interesting piece is it's really resonating with all of them because they realize that you're right. If I believe that we all can win, I'm going to act differently. If I believe that it's very interesting. It's actually been very humbling. This research on these three topics has been extremely humbling. I've been an extremely competitive person my entire life, where I very much encompassed the I'm going to win and you're going to lose mentality. And then I realized as I got a little bit older that I didn't really care if you lost, I just wanted to win. So it just means that I wanted to do my best. And I've realized as you get older and you get more wise and you get past everything is about me teenage years, that's not the best way to live life. And so as I've been going throughout, I don't know, my 20s, my 30s, and I'm starting into my 40s, I've realized that cooperation and really having that win-win mentality is best for everybody. And everybody succeeds in that regard because your strengths are different than my strengths. And the times that I can show you love because I've got enough to give, maybe you're struggling and you can, we're going to reinforce each other. And so when you ask me where it can help, I honestly think that gratitude, generosity, human flourishing, abundance mentality, they can help everywhere. It just depends where you need it at the moment. It's that holistic approach to humanity flourishing and individually, all of us flourishing together. I think that is something that we're losing in individualistic cultures, is that capacity to love each other and to help each other. And some of the research that I've been researching a lot lately is the amount of people that are practicing religion is decreasing, and a lot of times these concepts are taught in a religious capacity. And so if our populations aren't going to learn them from religion, and we're not teaching these things in school, how are we going to learn them? Where are we going to learn them? And that's why I think that it can help fundamentally everybody.
I think we're going to learn them from Allie and Katie. That's where I think we're going to learn them. That's where those things are going to happen. So we probably could keep on talking for quite a bit longer, but I think that we've kind of bumped up against our limits. All these topics just make me so interested in so many things. This idea of intentionality and how important that is. But a lot of times when we think of intentionality, we think, how can I get out of this? How can I move forward? But with Allie's talking about the abundance mentality, and that it works, we develop gratitude when people are generous with us. So the intentionality is not just how can I get through it, but the intentionality is a different mindset. How can we, or how can I help someone else? And then all of a sudden I'm helped by doing it. Anyway, I think it's fascinating, and I'm going to let everybody have a chance for one more word if they want to. But if we ever get invited back to do one of these in several months, it would be interesting to see how far along your research has come and where it's going to keep on going. So who would like to say anything just kind of to wrap us up? I know Davin, I want Davin to for sure. Well, why don't we start with Katie? Katie, then Allie, then Davin, then what else have we missed, or what else would you like to add just to kind of take us out of here?
I don't know if I want to add anything. I think I just want to emphasize that human beings, we're programmed to be resilient. We're programmed to not only survive, but to thrive. So stop and allow yourself to feel all the feels, speaking as a therapist, to feel all the feels and learn from them, and you'll be amazed at what you're capable of.
That's awesome. Thank you. Allie?
I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you for letting me talk on this topic. I agree with everything that's been shared, and just let's all, we're in this together. Let's all remember all of these good things and continue to reinforce these good practices.
Thank you, Allie. Dr. Karchelman, raise our average intelligence again.
Yeah. So I think Allie and Katie just have wonderful approaches for building, accentuating practices for living with a minimum of self-betrayal and self-deception. So these practices move us along that trajectory every day, just a little bit incrementally. So thank you, Michael, very, very much for including me in what you've done here.
So thank you, Davin. So I'll just finish by saying I am so grateful, so fortunate to be working with people like Katie and Allie and Davin. And a special word about Davin. So Davin and I have been doing this now for 4 or 5 years. And our partnership in this has been just one of the richest, most generative parts of certainly my professional, but also personal life. So it's just a joy to be doing what we're doing with who we're doing it with. So Mental Health Mondays, thank you again for inviting us all. If you have any questions, I've got a couple slides. This is what people have to endure when they work with me. So here's the folks. Davin's Associate Professor of Education at Dayton, co-editor of Adult Learning, and so much more. Allie's, we didn't mention titles, Executive Director of Career Services at Dixie State University, St. George. She's also, is it a Ninja Turtle? What is it? What is it you are?
Not a Ninja Turtle. I like to practice a ninja, like American Ninja Warrior obstacles.
Oh, okay. Yes, she and her family are ninja warriors with a win-win. They would, if they broke their leg, they'd stop and pull the other competitor across the line. And then Katie is, you know about Katie, she's instructor of psychology at North Idaho College. And before that, she was a psychology instructor, you can tell, a licensed psychotherapist specializing in trauma. We've talked about those things. We are so fortunate by the folks we get to work with. Our invitation is, if you'd like to follow some of the things we talk about, come visit us on the Profound Living blog. There's also a Facebook page, Profound Living Facebook group, and Practices for Deeper Living Facebook group. So there's a few things that we're engaged in as we go along. So having said that, thank you so much, and we'll see you again.